Good night, everyone. Welcome to the LSA Architectural Series. This one is our last lecture of the season. Our guest, the speaker, is VanderMaas. He's the design director and senior associate of Quadrangle Architects in Toronto. He was born in Netherlands, and then his family moved to St. Catharines, Ontario. This gave Marcus an understanding of urban density and the effect that it has in the city. Marcus family immigrated in 1986. He earned his Bachelor of Environmental Science in 1994, and then he received his Bachelor of Architecture from University of Waterloo. Marco joined Quadrangle in 2009 as a senior designer and became his design director in 2011. He was appointed to the senior associate role in 2014. He has an invaluable resource for multi-unit residential and mixed-use commercial buildings. Marco speaks regularly to the industry and public audience and contributes his thought and leadership on design topics to a number of media. In addition to his work with Quadrangle, Marco consults for the Woodworks, a Canadian Wood Council initiatives, and also he is a team member of the OCAD US Ambient Experience Lab research team. So please welcome Marcus tonight.
Well, thanks a lot. I know it was announced to be Richard Witt. I'm not quite the same height, nor am I quite as hairy as him, so there's like lots of differences between the two of us, but we do share a passion for design, and even though he's from the UK and I'm from Holland, we try to go beyond the building in some ways and try to actually find out how we can contribute to a complete community. And of course, we do it one building at a time. But as we are going through quite a lot of transformations in our urban environment, we find that together as a profession, we're making quite a lot of changes. So on that sort of topic, I want to speak tonight, because it's very interesting here in London. You're going through a lot of thinking as well about what the future holds, how your urban environment can change and can be vital and viable going into the future. And so maybe just to start off, how many people have read this document, the London Official Plan? Great, cover to cover, be honest. Well, I was going to impress you all, and I was going to read it cover to cover, but I must admit, I did not. But I got a fair bit into it, and one thing that I liked a lot is this particular line, and this to me rings true for a lot of municipalities, and the idea of how can we best continue to regenerate our urban areas and build residential environments within our downtown and its surrounding urban neighborhoods. And I think that's actually the quintessential problem that we're facing as a profession. The idea that more and more people want to live in urban areas, but of course through many years we have kind of separated a lot of uses for good reason, but I think what we now want to do is combine these uses again. So the book that I did read is Happy City by Charles Montgomery. Has anybody heard about this book or is familiar with this book? Yeah, some people here, that's great. What I really liked about this book is that it's not written by an architect or an urban planner, but it's written by somebody that's sort of observing about things that are kind of happening and kind of connecting the dots. And sometimes we're so busy with our day-to-day things that we sometimes miss the most obvious connections. And the idea, I guess, that Charles Montgomery is using is that we can have a happy city, and that, in fact, complete community, the idea of complete community and whatever that is, could actually become a complete community or become a happy city. So, and a great city is a happy city. So, in his book, he sort of says that cities are not just about creating sort of wealth and this engine that kind of is an economic force, but that it can also be a system where we can actually improve human well-being. And that's kind of interesting because so much we do day to day is following rules, obviously, and connecting kind of these strategies, planning strategies and zoning bylaws and code restrictions. But then we also have to connect them to what is an appropriate density. We have to connect it to conviviality. How do we, live together? And then when it really comes down to it, I think we want to have an ease to move around. And so some of the things that we've solved is actually going in the way of the things that we held really, really dear about our environments, our urban environments. And that is really getting to the places that we want to go very quickly and within a 5-minute walk or with a quick streetcar ride or even jumping in your car, right? So in that kind of context, with your official plan in mind, and then also kind of thinking about these recent developers that writers are kind of bringing to the table, I want to present to you my take, my interest in complete community building. And part of that is about looking at the future, what some of the code changes are helping us, I think, achieve in the future. But then, of course, thinking about the past and what we are doing today, to think about intensification strategies, this idea of complete communities, and then talking about the term mid-rise and what that really means and who really cares about that. Because at the end of the day, the code change is here, and as architects, I think we're also kind of, as much as we are building culture and buildings, we're also kind of building products for people to kind of use. So towards a new normal is something that I like a lot as well, because maybe 20 years from now, we don't even think about this as a change, but we think as a common sense. So about me a little bit. Okay, so I grew up in the Netherlands. This is the house actually that I grew up in. A very small town actually, only 30,000 people. And when you think about like a place like this, London, I mean, it's actually on those terms, relatively speaking, it's a big city, right? For my feeling. So I come from a very small town, which in the Netherlands is a big city. So my parents had a store. We lived above that store, and over time, this place kind of changed, of course, and it started out actually being a 2-story building. My grandparents put an addition on it, so it became a 3-story building. And I'm born in the same room as my mom is born in, right? So it's the kind of idea that this community sort of sustained through the years and kind of changed through the years. But what I want to point out is that the relationship of the building and the width of the street is kind of right. Like it kind of is in proportion to each other. And of course, when I grew up there, I didn't really think about that too much. But as an architect, I'm seeing that is, in some ways, one of the quintessential things that makes a community kind of come to be. Like it starts to really be vibrant and complete. The relationship of the street, the public realm, to the building, so that the building speaks to the public realm and the public realm kind of speaks to the building. So it's sort of in and out. When I came to Canada, it's funny because we moved because of kind of recession in the 80s in the Netherlands. And then, of course, we dipped right into a recession here. The 90s, there was very little building going on here in Canada. So I went through school at the time, and I got involved with yacht building. And so during that time, I learned a few different things. And I learned predominantly that design is about performance, aesthetics, and creature comfort in some ways. And that it's also about the craftspeople that bring the value to these three things. The value of working the material, the limitations, but also the opportunities that presents. So that collaboration of coming up with an idea, but also realizing is something that I kind of learned in that particular stage of my career. I was a student then, and I thought I was a hotshot designer. But really, when it came to working with these guys, I had to kind of prove that my ideas were worthy. So it was this kind of give and take that was starting to happen. So later on, when I got involved with sort of green building, sort of off-the-grid homes, the things that I kind of learned from the craftsmen I put into practice. So a lot of things I actually did with my own hands. And we challenged a lot of code, building code assemblies, just like straw bale construction, green roof, composting toilets, because the technology was there, and integrating it for our clients was kind of an important and a kind of responsibility as a professional. So a lot of that also meant, yeah, like, you know, rolling up your sleeves and actually getting into it. So some of the budgets were low, some of the budgets were high, but we managed to get some pretty nice projects going. And it was about orientation, it was about kind of understanding active and passive systems. So to me, you know, after dealing with sort of high-tech materials in the yacht industry, I was able to deal with very low-tech systems and materials in these custom homes. And again, that idea of community, that idea of what people bring, family and friends, you know, how can you get these things done, was very much part of that experience. So fast forward to my role now. I'm a design director at Quadrangle Architects. We work predominantly in the private sector. So we deal with lots of different scales, but we never really deal with institutional work. But there's lots of things that you find in institutions like theater space or kind of like gathering spaces or kind of the relationship to the street and how kind of sort of public space manifests itself. So it's very dynamic because our client group very much is involved in the decision making. And it's a retail store or if it's a really, really you know, kind of dense high rise, all that stuff is sort of related. And so this project is one of the very early projects that I was not involved with, but it was a very early project for Quadrangle, and the OEA has now awarded it a landmark award. And I like it because in some ways it's not a new build, but it's an adaptive reuse of an old building that I kind of got a new life as a broadcast, from a print shop to a broadcast station. And along Queen Street, City TV became almost like kind of like a catalyst for lots of kind of creative businesses and lots of kind of cool retail. So this whole community, this whole kind of neighborhood sort of defined itself by this particular building that just had the right scale. Again, like when you think about the height and then the width of the street, they're in proportion. So in that sense, a lot of my relatives always joke like, well, you go to Canada and everything is just so much bigger. And it's true, you know, in that my house where I grew up and the street that I grew up in, for me when I was very little, that was a big street and it was a big house. But when you compare it to what we're dealing with, our streets are much wider, and our buildings are not quite the right relationship yet. We're a very early city building nation in that sense. So, but these buildings that from the get-go have that kind of relationship can continuously sort of change and contribute to the life of the community. So when I talk about the future is here, I mean that as we have made decisions about what is and what is not allowed in the code, we're also trying to rethink them again. And I'm stuck with my slides. There we go. So it was kind of interesting when Ontario decided to change the code to allow combustible construction up to 6 stories, that in some ways we're seeing the future. I really believe that leveling the playing field of relatively simple buildings, like making them constructible out of steel, concrete, and wood, puts us back in that kind of sitting building mode. Because in the past, when you think about it, where trees grow, people build with wood. And so I go back to sort of my roots again. Amsterdam is in a place where resources are quite scarce, yet the structure and the foundations of these kind of buildings is made out of wood. So it's also quite tall, and sort of when you think also more local examples, going back. It's not cooperating with me. Okay, when you think about more local examples, the Longhouse is in fact kind of a local prototype of multi-family housing. I like the fact that, again, simple materials, kind of what's around, is something that is quite reasonable. And so today, when you think about some of the communities that are popping up, especially in BC, where the code change has happened quite a while ago, you see these kind of places. This is a UBC campus, and walking around there, of course, it's not at all what I grew up in, but I like the fact that I just feel like it's the right sort of scale, and sort of the buildings again are kind of related to the open space, and so it just kind of works that way, I think, and that's kind of what I wanted to point out. So there's definitely a business as usual idea as well today, and we know very much what is associated with sort of pro forma, like concrete and steel construction. We sort of almost have that figured out to a science, especially as we're going through the building boom. A lot of our clients know exactly, how to kind of expect the cost and what it takes to build buildings. But more and more throughout sort of the world, we are realizing that we can capitalize on renewable resources. So the idea that we can grow, cut, and repeat that process, and that in these environments where we actually kind of like grow our construction material is the kind of place that we like to relax in, is just kind of a thing that sort of makes sense. So I like that kind of storyline. And when you think about speed, ease, quality, and cost, there's lots of things to consider. And if you think about a piece of concrete and a piece of steel and a piece of wood and what it took to actually get it to the job site, you have to also appreciate that there's not just dollars and cents, but there's also environmental impact, of course, associated with it. And then how you kind of process again, kind of thinking back to the craftsman building the yacht. How can you get value out of each material? So at Quadrangle, we're very well versed at dealing with concrete environments, working with concrete, the steel, to build a lot of our buildings. And we've been really kind of embracing wood construction as well, as it is going to go up higher and starts to, like I said, sort of be in the same playing field as concrete and steel. And then thinking about that and the sort of things that we value most, I guess, in our industry right now, it is speed, ease, quality, and cost. And when you think about those, wood factors in quite positively. So the next topic is about intensification strategies. We have been seeing in the last 5 years quite a dramatic shift from predominantly sort of single-family homes being constructed in Ontario to more of a focus to apartment buildings. And it's quite interesting, that reversal of focus, which obviously is coinciding with people wanting to be in urban environments. But it also, I think, is interesting to point out that the semi and the row housing has stayed much the same. And so it means that we're just kind of living closer together, and there is more value on the land that we're building on. And I guess we're also trying to save some of that land for other uses. I'm going to go back to some of the graphics of your official plan, and it's very interesting. I pulled some of these out of it. That basically we have a choice on how we will develop in the future. We can go in a very compact way. We can also spread out, but there's a huge cost associated with that, like actually dollars and cent cost associated with that, because of course servicing a more spread out community is a lot more cost intensive than a more compact one, because we actually have the data to sort of back it up, because we've been doing it for some time. Also, what is very interesting in your particular case is that London, the actual kind of boundaries of London, has quite a bit of rural land within it. So going to, just like Mississauga did, going to the extreme outsides and then kind of running out of land to develop might not be necessary or might not be possible. And it's kind of interesting, as an official plan is not necessarily directive, it's kind of putting those options forward. So when I looked at these kind of images, it was quite interesting that the business as usual approach means that there's a certain percentage of doing what we're familiar with. But even in this particular case, there's a fair bit of high-rise and mid-rise necessary to reach objectives of the plan. When you go to the other scenario, that is quite compact, of course, the focus is very much associated with mid-rise and high-rise. And then the hybrid option also obviously has mid-rise and high-rise. So whatever you choose to do going forward, mid-rise and high-rise is part of the equation. So again, a kind of a good graphic that sort of sets the differences in a pretty good light is that there's almost 3 times or so the cost associated with suburban development versus urban development. But intensification is kind of like a scary word because it's of course associated with change. But I saw a tweet the other day that sprawl is also very, very scary. So those two words are equally kind of scary in people's mind because, right, like the pictures are there to sort of prove it. So I guess some kind of transition, some kind of way of going from more dense situations to sort of more spread out situation is necessary. And where are those going to happen? Well, I think they're happening in the places that we least expected in some ways. It's the places that we pass by all the time from going sort of A to B. I came into London today and there was quite a flow of cars that I was sort of involved with. Everything was moving very well, but the land use focus that Charles Montgomery is talking about in the book Happy City is something that we're really, really familiar with, obviously. So we work here and then we sort of live there and then that's where we shop. So of course, these streets are allowing us to move. It's a very good system. But it's kind of interesting that in order for this obviously to happen, there's a fair bit of sort of noise and there's a fair bit of kind of movement going on and there's sort of large landscape buffers from the property lines into where the houses start. And if you just think of this right-of-way, this street, 27 meters, quite typical, to thinking about a mid-rise building and you push that massing up against that property line, it's quite easy to imagine how that street all of a sudden transforms. Because there is more height, you're going to feel like there's more going on, obviously, so the speed will reduce. You're still having that same 27-meter right-of-way, but now all of a sudden you can have place for people to park, you can have place for people to walk, place for people to bicycle in, and you can still have some landscaping. So it's quite interesting how quickly it sort of transforms. And the base of these buildings can then start to interact with all that kind of different choices of traffic. So it's definitely mid-rise and mixed-use potential along a lot of our streets that we already have in place. And we don't have to actually change them very much to allow that to happen. So, of course, we've tried to intensify in the past. Like in the 90s, this was very much the model. This is a project we did when stacked townhouses were not the norm. This is a project we did with very close to our office, actually. We can see it from our office. And it's a two-level unit on top of another two-level unit and then parking in the garage. And today, very few architects are involved with these or need to be involved with these kind of projects because it's pretty much figured out. It's a product. It's easy to do, and it's also easy to sell in some ways. It's quite interesting when it first went up, people were kind of scratching their heads and sort of saying this will never work. But when you look at it now, it's very much hidden behind kind of the neighborhood. The trees have pretty much grown up around it, and you don't see much of the building anymore. So that's sort of a 20-year timeline there. Of course, the mixed-use component is very much non-existent in this. So today we've been sort of thinking about how a typical sort of apartment building, 4 stories, can actually transfer into one that is 6 stories. And so especially this is a concept for hot condos in Mississauga. The code didn't quite change quick enough, so we actually built it in 4 stories. But we were very much anticipating that it would be built out of 6 stories. And when you think again about the width of the right-of-way in that particular location, it would have been just fine. It would have just had the right relationship. So that's sort of some thoughts about intensification. So when it comes to complete community, you can see probably where I'm going with this, that it's really a people-first kind of approach. Very much keeping in mind all the things that we hold dear about our lifestyle. So the driving, the bicycling, the walking, and of course, we're investing in transit. So it's not like kind of saying, you know, we're not going to have certain things, but we're definitely going to kind of accommodate all. And this is a project we're working on currently in Scarborough, but it was actually zoned as a very high density, sort of 18-story building kind of community. But very few developers were interested to build that kind of density there. Eventually, the city settled for this type of approach. So the 6-story buildings along the right-of-way, the large arterial road, and then within the property, your typical townhouses. So again, the code now allows this kind of thing to actually happen. It's quite dense in some ways, but it's more of a horizontal spread out density rather than vertical with a huge open space at the base that perhaps nobody is using. Of course, a lot of this has to do with hoping that, you know, the proposed transit is going to happen. But even if it doesn't happen, these developments very much are about accommodating the car as well. But in just a one-level parking garage, very efficient, very effective, and we have rules of thumb how many cars would be, you know, accommodated per acre. So that kind of balance very quickly starts to work. And once that balance is there, you can actually think about what the buildings will look like and what they will behave like. So it's very much about eyes to the street again. Is that relationship, you know, that's appropriate. And so the internal spaces and also the edges, it's all about edges really. How do you accommodate the loading? How do you accommodate access to the parking garage? But more importantly than figuring out what the architecture looks like, it's actually about figuring out what the spaces in between start to look like. How do people meet each other? Where do people sit? You know, if it's a beautiful day or if it's a really rotten day, can you have the same kind of amenities? Can you make them work? We also believe that, you know, people are not going to access their garages right from their unit. They will actually go outside of their front door and then find their car. It reminds me a lot actually about how I grew up. Our car was 20-minute walk away because, you know, it just didn't have a place where we lived. So we had to actually walk, you know, we always have to keep that in mind that if we went on holidays or something like that, we had to kind of balance that getting to the car idea as well. And of course, as we walked to our car, we saw neighbors and we saw people that we knew. And so these chance encounters, so a 10-minute walk would turn into 20 minutes, would turn into 30 minutes, maybe, you know, have a coffee at a corner cafe or something like that. But that's the beauty of these communities that can start to emerge with that kind of low-scale building and this kind of high density. It's no longer about an open area that you hope that people will sort of use. No, it's these small open areas which of course are going to be used because there's a certain ownership associated with it because it's right happening at somebody's front door. So it's quite interesting that's where our focus is right now with these kind of projects. And so we've had a little experience with this, not just with the wood construction, but also with our you know, typical you know, everyday materials. And Pan Am Village is a perfect example. It was a kind of a team building experience. We were on the compliance side, so very much thinking about the buildings as they related to the open areas, very much thinking about what kind of efficiencies they needed, and then another team kind of taking it on and making those buildings a reality. So yeah, I think going forward, we're going to work much more together as professionals to make these communities happen. For us, it was also a huge focus on not just kind of like making these buildings work, you know, many buildings together, but also how do people move through these buildings from an accessibility point of view? Because the code didn't just change in terms of the combustible construction requirements, it also changed in terms of accessibility and, of course, energy efficiency. So there's a lot of things that are actually happening and affecting our work as professionals. And we have to sort of balance those and go forward with them and embrace them. So the Pan Am Village was a great example. Another great example is the Regent Park revitalization that we've been part of. Lots of different architects again, realizing lots of different buildings, but with the same kind of ideas in mind, pushing the buildings up to the property line, allowing lots of open spaces to be scalable to, you know, a person's size, so to speak. And this happens to be very close to where I live, and we use the athletic center quite a lot. There's a swimming pool there, and it's just fantastic how many cultures, how many different languages you see and hear, and so this community is really transforming right in front of our eyes, and it has a lot to do with the built form, obviously, but more importantly, it has to do with how the people use the spaces that are emerging in between. So just to give you kind of a snapshot of what we're involved with is the project. That's this one. So we're building a higher mid-rise, so to speak, and then townhouses. And again, there's public-private space, outdoor space, but then as well, it's kind of the idea of a lifestyle emerging. So because the different types of buildings that this provides allows for, of course, a diversity of experiences, and really young and old people can kind of identify themselves in this. There's open spaces, you know, they're communal, but then there's also private spaces, more like on a porch type of level, or a private terrace. So the third example that I'm using is downtown Markham. With this particular client, Remington Group, we've been working for more than 20 years now. Very, very humble beginnings, townhouses in this particular area. Oh, you can't see that. Sorry. This area right here. And of course, that could have continued just like the surrounding areas, that kind of development. But instead, through lots of conversations with the municipality, but also our client group and amongst ourselves, we managed to come up with quite a different vision. And a lot of that was also to do with the infrastructure that was being created there. The 407 came to be, but also the GO train is right there. And so when it's all said and done, it will look something like this. And I would say, you know, a good portion is starting to materialize already. So the very first buildings that we did were mid-rise buildings surrounding the kind of lower townhouses and these kind of buildings. And then around the Viva bus line that was being constructed, we came up with a vision for more of a Main Street type of place. Again, quite unlike anything we've ever seen, because we wanted to give this place also a certain identity. So it wasn't like taking, kind of an idea of Paris or London to Markham. No, it was kind of figuring out what this could be. And so the retail shops at the base, and then the hotel places that are directly above there, but then also the condo units, the sort of market-driven condo units above, needed to have a set of rules, and sort of, kind of stacking them had to kind of make sense in that sense. So that's under construction, and it's starting to kind of come together. And then across the street, you can see in the back, there's a purpose-built headquarters for Aviva. That particular company decided, based on some of the vision and some of the plans that we have for the future, and also some of the infrastructure that are being placed there, that this would be the right place for their employees. So that's coming to fruition, that building. And then a cinema complex that's in the foreground here, that will then also, across the street from the project that I just showed, will kind of complete this new Main Street. Again, the kind of size of the Main Street width is proportionate to the height of the buildings that are along it. And no place is complete without a little bit of fun. And so very much part of the realization of this particular sort of downtown is this carousel, and which is associated with sort of a pond that becomes a skating rink, and candy shop, of course. So the kind of fun, the color, the kind of cartoon-like characters very much play also that idea of that it's for kids, right? Like play with the imagination. But us adults are just grown-up kids, so we're of course going to love this as well. And so we've been very much collaborating with the client group, but also with artists to make this a reality. So given sort of 3 examples of this sort of kind of complete communities coming to fruition, and something we can actually point to and has become real. And mid-rise and mixed use is very much part of the equation. Mid-rise really creates these walkable communities. It's a moderate scale that also creates this space in between. And then we get that density that we're all afraid of, quite naturally, right? Like it starts to work in a fairly non-threatening way, and it becomes this appealing development everybody's sort of invested in, and it becomes a development that has an identity. So a lot of these spaces right now, the top one, we pass by all the time. We don't even think about it. It becomes a destination. It's easy to park there, and you run into your big blocks or whatever like that. And then you go back to your community. We don't even think that these places are so vast and so big, and they're actually like a temporary hold in some ways for something much more valuable. So the whole mid-rise conversation is good for everyone, and we should really consider it very carefully. But it's funny. It's also associated with a lot of complication in some ways. I think a lot of people are saying like you need just as much investment in your loading and in your amenities than you have in your high-rise. So why not just go and do some really, really big high-rises? But I think what we sometimes forget is that mid-rise doesn't actually exist in the building code. Mid-rise is not a term that we use as architects, to realize our buildings. It's a planning term that planners are using to think about, what kind of massing a community needs. But when it comes to realizing buildings, I'm kind of the opinion that we shouldn't use mid-rise. we should think about these buildings as low buildings. Up to 6 stories is actually a low building in some ways that is relatively simple to realize. But they do contribute positively to this public realm and this sort of mixed use opportunity. So moving beyond advocacy is quite important at this stage because it ties in with how so many individuals and municipalities want to see us go. So we care a lot, obviously, and we've been helping to kind of carve out some performance standards. And throughout sort of the last 5 or 6 years after BC changed their code, I've been helping also Woodworks after we, as a company, helped the City of Toronto define mid-rise guidelines. I helped Woodworks to sort of translate that into their information. And in some ways, this is obviously quite obvious that as soon as you get away from sort of like really dense urban centers, that mid-rise opportunity is in fact everywhere. Of course, every municipality likes to have it happen first in certain places. These sort of darker avenues is where Toronto likes it to happen. And in your official plan, there's also areas where it is necessary to happen first. So, but I kind of want to show this idea that's kind of the reality of these more established urban areas, and you have lots of that already here. Your 20-meter right-of-way also has that 6-story potential, and a lot of times these places already have the transit and the cycling opportunities established. So lots of streets that we're so familiar with are quite underdeveloped, in fact, right? Like it sort of has had its first sort of phase of development, and a lot of these houses have come to the end of their life cycle in many ways. So as we make plans to intensify, we see these buildings obviously pop up, and we're afraid that it's that it's changed for the bad, but it's actually changed for the good, of course, because this happens very slowly, and once it's sort of reached its full potential, all of a sudden you have this very vibrant community that has also lots of community services, etc. And a building that we did in the 90s is a good example. We call this our classic prototype. We did this with a great golf developer that tends to be very much ahead of the curve and is involved in city building to a high degree. And what I like about this is on my way to work, I bike past this building every day. And what I really, really like about this particular building is that the second cup that has been there right from the beginning, again, defines that corner and makes it that community feel. So you forget about the building in some ways because it sort of blends in, but you do sort of notice that it has the right relationship to the street. More recently, it's sort of on the fringes of the Pan Am Village. We've been involved with a building like this. Streetcar Developments has kind of specialized in mid-rise buildings, and so again, maybe a little bit of a more modern look. And what we didn't anticipate was that at the very first few years, car dealerships were actually moving into these retail stores, because it was like this sort of semi-industrial lands were home to a lot of car dealerships. So, and that's the thing about when you put the appropriate scale of building and you're anticipating the future, the first little while it might not come to fruition, but at least as professionals, as we design it in the right way, we can anticipate the more community-based type of stores popping up. Now there is a bar in the corner, there's a health food store starting to open up. So it's quite interesting that in the course of sort of 5-10 years, there's quite a bit of changes happening. When you get outside of the city center, there's less need to step it to make these complicated sort of like transitions. And this is a much larger right-of-way. This is along Shepherd, just north of the 401. We're going outside of the city core. And these mid-rise buildings, are kind of, again, fairly simple and straightforward. Suburban intensification. And then the one here I call kind of small town insertion in some ways, very close to Main Street. This is a 6-story building, and the articulation of the facade is very much in keeping with what's happening around it, but it doesn't have to be the same. It doesn't have to be the same style. It can be a bit more modern, and in fact, we did that fairly well, I think, in this example. Cube Lofts is where there's some traditional buildings, and then our more modern insertion in here, kind of fits quite well. So, mid-rise, yes. Why is it so complicated? Well, I think it's because we write a lot about it. We do a lot of planning documents. We do a lot of official plans. We give a lot of rules to these buildings. But again, I want to point out wherever you see the word mid-rise, you should start to think, what they mean is a building that relates really well to the street. In some ways, that's very similar to the buildings we used to build, right, 100 years ago or so, because they sort of hide the service areas. They are pushed up against the property line. They have a kind of a good neighbor type of quality, and this is an example of a 6-story building that we think will contribute positively to its surroundings. We don't know what it's going to be built out of, but we anticipate wood, but it doesn't have to be, obviously. But when you think about the section, the dashed line is what it replaces. So it was a rental building that kind of, again, reached the end of its life cycle. And what we're replacing is a building that is the same height as the right-of-way. We are also moving it a little bit close to the property line, away from the established residential area, and then provide this kind of stepping so that it's a good neighbor, and that there's not a lot of overlook or overwhelming of the adjacent neighborhood. But certainly there is complications associated with these kind of buildings, and you have to have very much coordination happening with your consultant team right from the get-go. The soil conditions need to be considered, obviously. What about adjacencies in terms of your shoring or your tiebacks? So building kind of a dedicated team and having your clients very much be part of that decision making becomes of the utmost importance. On the ground floor, typically sort of retail and community uses, so you need to transfer the loads. Also considering grade. I mean, of course, we're considering all those things now, but with the townhouse model, we've learned to do it in a fairly efficient and consistent way. And then, of course, your stepping what is the right material to accomplish this. It is very much important to realize. So, to do these buildings, we certainly think about embracing wood because it's such a sort of easy material in some ways. We're so familiar with it. We're already building communities with it today. And then it becomes a checklist of is it 6 stories or less? Okay, that's the first check. How do the units all line up? You know, for the first few buildings that we're going to be doing, we're going to want to keep it simple. Think about the cladding. You know, keep that to a 3-story minimum because light. The wood structure is light, so a heavy material as a cladding doesn't make a lot of sense on those buildings. Then it's about panelization, take advantage of prefabrication. And then also think about how the balconies work. Don't do cantilevers, keep the envelope sort of clean and tight, and then have the balconies as accessories so they can be changed once they start to you know, age and show signs of decay. Also, in near urban areas where there's less established neighborhoods and you have to do less stepping and sort of like this transition, it makes a lot of sense. And wood is best in shorter spans. And then the one really, really good thing, of course, is that the structure is so light that in poor soil conditions, this is a great way of building. And that brings me to the 6-story code change. And that is sort of associated with, of course, the idea that ideally it's associated with mixed-use development and sort of these infill projects. What that really means is that there's a limit to the height. The top floor cannot be higher than 18 meters from the first floor up. And then between occupancies, make sure there's a 2-hour fire rating. A lot of examples of this have focused on having concrete first floors because that's where the retail is happening, as community services are happening, wider spans are maybe necessary. And that also deals with all kinds of other solutions. So thinking of some of the examples that we've seen in BC, some of the first buildings, this is the very first building, is Remy, that I've seen and sort of looked at. And it's a very simple building. Like there's nothing much to it. But a lot of emphasis is placed on the amenities around the building. So the landscaping, some of the community pavilions that are part of the plan. And more recently, the examples are a little more adventurous. There's a bit more cantilevers going on. There's more expression of the wood finishes. So it's quite exciting to see in just 5 years how the industry there has kind of embraced this, and they're very much mixed in with lower, but also higher buildings. So our sort of early beginnings, I guess, in this has been realized in Mississauga. Again, like I said before, only 4 stories, but we certainly designed it and anticipated 6 stories. And it was kind of fun. The mayor came out for the ribbon cutting, and lots of people. It was a great sunny day. Lots of people came out to watch it, and it's nice to see the scale of the building and the people, and the building is just basically a backdrop to this community. And so, walking around it actually reminded me a lot about when I was a kid, visiting some of my relatives in new subdivisions. That scale, the kind of materiality, the landscaping, the kind of freshness, the kind of newness of this. And yeah, I'm quite happy the way it turned out. But in that lower right hand corner image, you can see, you know, our typical townhouses have a pretty good relationship with this building. But now, all of a sudden, you're creating so much more diversity. You're creating so much more accessibility, because all these houses, of course, are associated with steps and stairs to make them work. Whereas this building, you know, you can sort of just walk in and roll in, and the units are on each floor, so it's much more accessible, and there's much more diversity in sizes available as well. So we're doing more of these. Also, more thinking about challenging some of the official plans. In fact, in Vaughan at Maple Station, this particular piece of property was destined to be big box retail. And so we went in for an official plan amendment to ask for allowing this mid-rise sort of Main Street idea, and then having the townhouses behind it. Actually, one of our staff members lives there, and yeah, it's a simple walk to the go and a 30-minute ride to Union Station. So, you know, it starts to solve the problems that I was mentioning earlier, and I think that's where we need to head into. So some of the early visualizations included this one here. Again, focusing not so much on the buildings and the design, but the scale of the buildings associated with the public realm, and what could happen in that public realm, different age groups and different modes of transportation. And then currently, this is the building that is being marketed and going forward into construction soon. And so one thing as architects we sometimes are a little scared of is product development. And just like, I guess, the townhouses eventually became, I guess, a product that we got less and less control over, I think perhaps what we need to do is think about this 6-story way of building, this mid-rise, mixed-use way of building, and maybe develop the product from the get-go, so that we continue to have a very big hand in it. Not so much necessarily in the detailing, and because there's lots of great contractors and suppliers, but think about the building science, think about the relationship of these buildings to the open space, so that we become more and more coordinators and visionaries of making this kind of product available to people. I like this quote. The president of Rescon represents a lot of the developers, that it's really complex requirements that are emerging here. So these new levels of densities are associated with complex requirements. And we really need to be sort of helping each other become more sophisticated technically, but also planning oriented, to understand these official plans. What are we actually trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? And then collaborate more than ever before. Know where somebody's responsibility ends and another person's begin, and help each other kind of bridge that gap. When it comes to feasibilities of these kind of projects, it's very much driven by parking. It's never, ever really driven by the look of the building. So with the product development in mind, you start at the bottom. You start at the efficiencies that you can achieve. That's actually never seen, right? But as soon as you reach those efficiencies, you can start to talk about the transitions that are required. What kind of stepping, what kind of road are you on? What kind of neighborhood is already around? So again, like it's not at all about the look of the building yet. It's about kind of going through these sort of like templates and understanding of the planning rationale. And then it's very much about taking a guy that is used to the 2 guys in a truck kind of method of construction and making your place in the conversation, because you know that you can save time in terms of the length that it takes. Like a typical construction, has a certain time and has a certain waste associated with it. But then there's weather conditions, of course, that limit some of the quality that can be reached. But again, as professionals, being at the forefront and very clearly explaining what our value is and how also manufacturers can be part of the conversation, you start to make that timeline a lot smaller, and you also start to reduce the waste generation. And so as we're moving towards smaller footprints, we also move towards having people move in a lot quicker, because there's nothing more exciting than digging the hole, and there's nothing worse than waiting for your unit to be finished. So way more emphasis on the front end, coordinating things and fixing things before they become a problem, which is what we're so good at, right? So we kind of have to stake that territory. So when you get then to this capitalizing on the code change, you get situations like this happening, where you experiment on your smaller buildings, just like we did, and then you are ready to kind of move into the next level of sophistication and height. And the better you get, the more people you're actually pulling in to the front end. We're going to get way more building science people probably on the front end as well, and code experts, etc. So for us, Hot Condos actually started with a tour of this facility. We didn't have a site. We didn't have the idea of what context we were going to be designing this building into. All we knew is that our client wanted to capitalize on this kind of machinery and these kind of panels being manufactured. So it was very much a product development kind of exercise. Felt a little bit like my days at the yacht building place, and kind of thinking about industrial design more than architecture. And what I also liked about it is that all of a sudden, these guys that know how to do this, were teaching us. They were telling us, and they were so happy about that we were listening, right? How big these panels needed to be efficient, what kind of materials they were sourcing, where are they getting it from, and so also so happy to say that they can have quality control to sort of inches, right? And so hearing that gives you a lot of faith and builds that kind of relationship from the design to the production. So our thinking was very much, at the very get-go, a 4-story building, and then scaling that up to a 6-story building. And what I really liked about this process was that the structural engineer produced these kind of drawings, color-coded, line weights. Oh my God, it's like the architect's dream, right? And so it's very much, without having a site, all of a sudden puts a little bit of, in my mind as a designer, it's like, oh, maybe we can do sort of different shades of brick or something like that. Or maybe it would be appropriate to kind of, maybe nobody will notice that, but have this process be the inspiration for what the building is going to look like. Because of course, at the end of the day, we had very limited amount of decisions in terms of like window sizes, in terms of like balcony sizes, but we still had to make a very compelling kind of product, so to speak. So a lot went into diagramming, a lot went into understanding the whole system, and digging a hole for your underground garage. That became pretty much, the dimensions of the garage became the walls of the outside, and the corridor, of course, leading through it. And then we decided on having kind of counterintuitive in some ways, having the corridor and the outside walls being structural, and then having the structure sort of span between those, which meant that we could run services through those. In some of our newer designs, we're actually running the structure the other way. So, you know, you don't have to stick to one idea. You can kind of change it up, but at least everybody agreed on it. And then the secondary structure was more about dividing up the right size of the units and giving some architectural expression by way of bay windows in this particular case. And then the decision that we made in terms of making the balconies accessories and having them self-supporting added another dimension to the project. So again, relatively simple buildings, and this all seems fairly straightforward. I realize that, but it was very much about having everybody involved at the very get-go. So it wasn't just coming out of my head, it was very much a team effort. And so, kind of like furniture building, we like this graphic, of course, stole kind of from the IKEA system. You know, we have a whole lot of things that we know and we can utilize in the construction, but trying to do it alone leads to a lot of frustration. So that whole buddy system, and kind of also when questions arise, having that kind of good relationship to headquarters is certainly helpful, and that's the kind of fun that I think we can have in developing this further. So you get to very much a kit of parts. The kit of parts, of course, can be stick frame, but it can also be more adventurous type of engineered construction. And I also think the other materials like light steel construction and precast concrete or cast in place concrete can start to benefit from this way of thinking and this way of working. What we felt was amazing actually in the very first building, in Hut Corners there's 3 buildings, so what we thought was very, very cool was that as soon as we started to sort of say that this certain things needed to be done, all of a sudden we got these little brackets, these little things emerging on the job site that explained to us that the workers were very much engaged and were able to accommodate. The straps are for each floor to make sure that they don't blow away. The hold downs are to, of course, make that really, really good connection with the foundation, and then the roof anchors are, of course, for window washing and maintenance, because as soon as you get bigger buildings, you need these kind of things to deal with, because in Part 9, there's no such thing as earthquakes, wind loads, anything like that. We're picking things out of a table, and every once in a while, you know, one of our houses kind of blows away, right? Like, so we have to be mindful of that. With the bigger buildings, we certainly keep all that stuff in mind. And then when it comes to safety features like sprinkler systems, we're sprinkling the balconies. We're dealing with, of course, a more advanced way and checking where the vapor barrier goes, and also considerations of acoustics come into play. And in fact, very, very much different than a concrete building. The bigger you got your floors, the better it's going to perform. So capitalizing on some of these TGI engineered lumber offerings that are readily available are quite useful, but also imagining that a floor-to-floor height is going to be different in this kind of construction. When it comes to the outside, I think we like the idea of brick, and we associate quality with that. But of course, there's a challenge with hanging this sort of heavy material, this heavy cladding off a light structure. And so also with shrinkage, we're going to have to think about how high we can go with masonry, and then also thinking about maybe on each floor. In our case, we had a shelf angle on each floor, so that each unit would expect the same kind of settling and shrinkage and quality. So wrapping up the idea of product development, it very much starts with considering the site, of course. And in this particular case, I like this case study because we have a lot of these. There's sort of the in-between strip malls that have, they're sort of in between sort of a downtown, established downtown, and maybe a newer strip mall, and they look kind of sad. And so what we think is that you can definitely spruce it up with some landscaping and some paint and some structural enhancements or some signage, and maybe have a kind of farmer's market or something like that. But I think what's more important is to actually look at these sites and think about them in these terms, that they can actually become sort of an office building, for example, or a medical building, or something that the community needs that is a bit more dense and has sort of four sides to it. Or all these neighbors get together and instead of a sort of a committee of adjustment type of appeal, they form more of a rezoning situation where you get a much different kind of community offering. Retail will be at the base, community services at the base, and then of course living above. And then there's still ample space in these kind of situations for townhouses that create the proper transition to the established neighborhood. And so in our office, we do this through dedicated teams. We test the feasibility of the sites very quickly because we know kind of what we should be doing, how the massing should lay itself out, and then the idea of prototyping and understanding where each material comes from, and so that then we can sort of have the speed to market, so that it's very much into a product development kind of mindset. So towards a new normal, I said before that 20 years from now, we're probably not even going to think about this too much, that this is different, or at least I hope so, because, you've probably seen a lot of articles that are being published right now. I know that Canada has a couple of demonstration projects, and the US also has a couple of demonstration projects. And right now, that red line represents where we can go with the code right now, six stories. But if nature can, reach up to 30 stories, I think we certainly can as well. And I'm not saying that every building has to be built out of wood. It's just that it's yet another option. And so when we're talking about community building, we need options, right? And everybody has a different comfort level. But I like the quote that wood has the performance potential of a race car, but we're only allowed to drive it up and down residential streets at 20 kilometers an hour. And I like this because it sort of puts in perspective, I think, what we can do with a material like that. And so just to kind of quickly go through what is happening in other countries. In 2008, London built a 9-story building, followed by Australia doing a 10-story building. And of course, Canada, being rich on resources, could not be far behind. So we've built in 2014 our Wood Innovation Design Center, a little bit out of the way. It's Prince George, BC. And what is nice about it is that around that same time, there was a call made for expression of interest for a demonstration project here in Canada, and we submitted with a team for Toronto, but the ones that have been announced so far are one in Quebec and one in BC, so 13 stories and 18 stories, which is pretty exciting. There's some criticism, I guess, of the 18-story one, because it's a sort of copy of a student residence out of concrete. That maybe it could look a little more exciting, but so be it. what we're trying to do is stay ahead or stay kind of in line, the race to the top, so to speak. And so our two projects go beyond. So these two are happening in Ontario, in Toronto. One is in a commercial building, 5 stories. The other one is 6 stories. It's a condo. These two are happening outside of the demonstration project type of realm. So they're for our private developer type of clients, entrepreneurial clients that feel that this is giving them sort of like an edge and a difference. And so very much interested, of course, with our friends to realize one very soon in Ontario. And just a couple of images of the project that we are working on. The office building is in Liberty Village, so it's amongst, kind of 100-year-old brick and beam buildings. So for us, this is exciting because the client very much likes the brick and beam feel, but we're having an opportunity to do it in a much more advanced way. So we can utilize underfloor plenum air distribution. What we can also do is, of course, get away from the draftiness that some of these buildings, these warehouses have. So we can have a much better sort of building science envelope, curtain wall. And of course, the tenants just like it because of its inviting quality of space. There's lots of studies that say that living in an environment that's more organic is associated with less sick days, etc. So that's kind of a big plus as well. So here again, we have kind of quick view of what this building section will look like. Not much different than some of your Class A concrete or steel buildings. So very much trying to incorporate a lot of those things. We're not trying to go back to our construction, 100 years ago. And then our condo that is currently in the sales sort of stage in the beach, Toronto East, is also kind of going beyond the stick frame, beyond the panelization and dimensional lumber into a more engineered solution. And in this particular case, it's your typical kind of like efficient parking garage. The site works, so to speak. And the first story is very much associated with retail functions, loading, etc. So it's a concrete plinth. And then on top of that, we have the wood panels that become that kind of kit of parts and that kind of way of building almost like a piece of furniture. And then similar to our hot condo model, the balconies become accessories. So there's a certain serviceability associated with it. And again, just like in the office building environment, the lobby is very much this warm glow that sort of is inviting and works really, really well. So that, again, we don't have to spend hours and hours going to the cottage. The cottage is basically in the city. A lot of exposed wood is possible in these kind of projects. And again, we're trying to define our own look for Ontario with this kind of product. It's not going to be like BC. It's going to be unique. And just to kind of leave you with some words from our Prime Minister, I like the idea that we're sort of going beyond Canada as a place for resources I think as codes are changing, as we're building communities, we're going to be more and more known for a place for being, associated with resourcefulness. And our profession has a great sort of role to play. And it's kind of funny, your namesake city has this project in the works. It's an 80-story timber building. I'm not sure if that's really necessary, to go that high, but it just kind of goes to show you that you can be your own sort of city, do your own thing, and be known for your own kind of community building expertise. And I've been very happy preparing this for you, because I think that the official plan, which gave me sort of the inspiration to put this together, is a very aspirational document. And I wish you all the best, and hopefully I can contribute in some way and fashion, to make this city great. Because at the end of the day, we are very, wait for it, resourceful. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. We're going to receive any questions that you might have to Marco. So who wants to start? Okay, don't be shy. Well, let's start with the first one. We have seen different cities around Toronto regarding to the low-rise concept. I've been in Waterloo, Kitchener, what is happening there. And obviously here in town, we have seen all these development to a high-rise concept that we want to go 20, 30 high buildings in our corporate towns. I don't know if that one is the best way to go, but with this renewal that every city goes into its fabric, what would be the approach that you see from our end to try to help the people who is taking the decisions to move forward in the city in the right direction?
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent question, and it's not a question that an architect can answer all by him or herself, obviously, and that's why I think like that quote that I had earlier rings true to me, that we're going to be more and more collaborative in terms of figuring out what site is a good site, what kind of massing is the right massing. We're going to be more and more kind of mindful of a larger piece of property accommodating a whole bunch of buildings in phasing, and then at the end of the day, we're going to be more and more mindful of the building science that's associated with it. And so I really feel like we're just I can't answer that, because architects are just one part of the answer, and all the way from the trades to the politicians need to actually come together, and there has to be a certain will to make things happen. And I think, for example, lifting development charges is a fantastic step in the right direction, because it creates that environment of goodwill and kind of making things happen. In some of the most successful areas in Toronto were associated with the redevelopment zoning, where all of a sudden some of the zoning was being lifted, and just sort of waiting to see what people would do, in that kind of case. So code change happens, and we have to be aware of it and change our way of doing things. And then zoning restrictions happen, and we have to educate ourselves about what that means. And then also some of these development charges change or get lifted or something, and we have to communicate what opportunities there are associated with that. So we all have a role to play and responsibility. That's, I guess, the best answer that I can give.
Thank you so much for coming.
Yes, appreciate it.